I thought my worst day couldn't get worse. My daughter was fighting for her life. I had no money, and strangers were laughing at my torn clothes. But when the richest man in the city walked through those hospital doors and saw what they did to me, everything changed forever. If you believe in karma and second chances, you need to hear this story. Hit that like button if you're ready for a tale that will restore your faith in humanity. And subscribe because stories like this deserve to be shared. My name is Sarah, and I need to tell you about the day that changed everything. It started like any other Tuesday morning. I was getting ready for my second job when I heard Emma coughing from her bedroom. But this wasn't her usual cough. This was different, desperate, terrifying. I rushed to her room and found my 6-year-old daughter struggling to breathe, her lips turning that shade of blue that every parent dreads. Emma has asthma, but I'd never seen her this bad. Her inhaler wasn't working, and with each passing second, I watched my little girl fight for air. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not my cleaning uniform that I'd been wearing for 14 hours straight. Not the fact that I hadn't slept. Not even the $23 in my wallet that was supposed to last us the rest of the week. I scooped Emma into my arms and ran. I didn't have a car, couldn't afford the repairs after the transmission went out last month, so I called an ambulance. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours as we raced to Mercy General, Emma's small hand gripping mine while the paramedic worked to stabilize her breathing. All I could think was, please God, not her too. I'd already lost her father in Afghanistan 3 years ago. I couldn't lose Emma. When we arrived at the emergency room, I was still wearing my faded cleaning uniform, with Martinez Janitorial Services embroidered on the pocket. My hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and I probably smelled like the industrial disinfectant I'd been using all night. But I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was getting help for my daughter. The waiting room was packed with people, and I immediately felt the weight of their stares. There were families in designer clothes, sitting in clusters, looking annoyed at having to wait. Business executives in expensive suits checked their Rolexes impatiently. And then there was me, a single mother in work clothes, holding her daughter and trying not to fall apart. I approached the reception desk, Emma still struggling in my arms, and explained the situation to the nurse. She looked at me with that expression I'd grown used to, the one that said, another charity case. When she asked for my insurance information, my heart sank. I handed over the card for the basic plan I could barely afford, knowing it probably wouldn't be enough. I'm sorry, but your insurance has a high deductible for emergency services, she said, not sounding sorry at all. We'll need a deposit before we can admit your daughter. How much? I asked, though I already knew the answer would be more than I had. $2,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. I looked down at Emma, whose breathing was getting more labored, then back at the nurse. Please, I whispered. She can't breathe. I'll figure out the money, but please just help her. That's when I heard the first comment from behind me, a woman's voice, loud enough for everyone to hear. Some people really shouldn't have children if they can't afford to take care of them. I turned around to see where the voice came from and spotted her immediately. A woman in her 50s wearing what looked like a $1,000 handbag and shoes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was sitting with her family, and they were all staring at me with a mixture of disgust and amusement. I mean, look at her, the woman continued, not even trying to lower her voice. Coming to a private hospital dressed like that. There are county hospitals for people like her. Her teenage son, who appeared to be there for what looked like a minor sports injury, actually laughed. Mom, maybe she's cosplaying as the cleaning lady, he said, and they all chuckled like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. I felt my face burn with shame, but I tried to focus on Emma. The nurse was explaining something about transferring us to the county hospital, but Emma's breathing was getting worse by the minute. I couldn't wait for another ambulance ride. I couldn't risk losing more time. Please, I said again, my voice breaking. I work 2 jobs. I can pay it back. I just need you to help my daughter now. The woman with the expensive handbag, I later learned her name was Mrs. Morrison, stood up and walked closer to where I was standing. "Honey," she said, in a voice dripping with false sweetness, "maybe if you spent less money on having children and more money on bettering yourself, you wouldn't be in this situation." Other people in the waiting room were starting to whisper and point. Some were even pulling out their phones, probably to record what they thought was going to be some kind of dramatic scene. I felt completely exposed, like everyone could see right through to my deepest fears and insecurities. "Mommy," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why are they being mean to us?" That broke something inside me. My daughter, who was struggling to breathe, was worried about people being mean to us. I wanted to scream at all of them, to tell them that I was worth something, that I worked harder than any of them probably ever had, that losing my husband had turned my world upside down, but I was still fighting every single day to give my daughter a good life. Instead, I just held Emma closer and tried to block out their voices, but Mrs. Morrison wasn't done. "I'm just saying," she announced to the room. "There are programs for people like her, welfare offices, charity clinics. Why should the rest of us have to wait longer because she can't afford proper health care?" That's when her son chimed in again. Maybe she should have thought about that before having a kid she couldn't afford. The cruelty in his voice made me feel sick. I was about to lose it completely when something shifted in the atmosphere of the room. There was a commotion at the entrance, security guards moving, expensive cars pulling up outside, the kind of arrival that meant someone important was coming in. But I was too focused on Emma to pay much attention. Her breathing was becoming more and more labored, and I was terrified we were running out of time. The automatic doors opened, and I caught a glimpse of a man in an expensive suit walking in, surrounded by what looked like assistants and security. Hospital administrators appeared out of nowhere, greeting him like he was royalty. But I couldn't focus on any of that. Emma was my world, and my world was falling apart in my arms. What I didn't know was that this man, Marcus Chen, the tech billionaire whose company had revolutionized healthcare software, had been quietly observing the entire scene from the moment he walked in. While the hospital staff rushed to greet him, his attention was entirely focused on the young mother being humiliated in his hospital's waiting room. Marcus had been coming to Mercy General for a board meeting, but something about the scene unfolding in front of him made him pause. He watched as Mrs. Morrison continued her cruel commentary, watched as other patients joined in with their whispers and stares, and watched as a young mother tried desperately to maintain her dignity while her daughter struggled to breathe in her arms. But there was something familiar about that young mother, something that made him look closer, and then it hit him. He knew her face. 3 months earlier, Marcus had been visiting his elderly mother at her apartment across town. She had early-stage dementia, and sometimes she would get confused and wander. On that particular day, she had gotten lost trying to walk to the corner store. Marcus had been frantically searching the neighborhood when he found her sitting on a bus bench, crying and confused. But she wasn't alone. A young woman in a cleaning uniform was sitting beside her, holding her hand and speaking to her in the gentlest voice. The woman had called the police to report a lost elderly person and was waiting with his mother, making sure she felt safe and cared for. When Marcus arrived, breathless and panicked, the young woman, Sarah, had explained how she'd found his mother wandering and disoriented. She'd used her own phone to call for help, bought his mother a bottle of water from her own pocket, and spent over an hour making sure she was okay. Even though she was clearly supposed to be somewhere else, Marcus had tried to give Sarah money that day to thank her for her kindness, but she'd refused. "Anyone would have done the same," she'd said with a smile. "I just hope someone would do the same for my mother if she ever needed help." Now standing in his hospital's waiting room, Marcus watched as this same woman, this angel who had shown such compassion to his mother, was being torn apart by cruel strangers while her own child fought for air. He'd heard enough. Marcus walked across the waiting room, his security detail following at a distance. The conversations died down as people recognized him. His face had been on the cover of Forbes Just last month, Mrs. Morrison's mouth actually fell open when she realized who was approaching. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice calm, but carrying the kind of authority that made everyone stop talking. He looked directly at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I couldn't quite place. Recognition, maybe. Kindness, definitely. "Ma'am," he said to me, "is this your daughter who needs medical attention?" I nodded, too shocked to speak. Emma was still struggling in my arms, and I couldn't understand why this obviously important man was talking to me. Marcus turned to address the room, but his gaze lingered on Mrs. Morrison and her family. "I couldn't help but overhear some of the conversation happening here," he said. "And I have to say, I'm deeply disappointed in what I've witnessed." Mrs. Morrison tried to backtrack immediately. "Oh, Mr. Chen, we weren't, we were just—" "You were just what?" Marcus interrupted. "Mocking a mother whose child is having a medical emergency, making jokes about her appearance while her daughter struggles to breathe?" The silence in that waiting room was deafening. You could hear Emma's labored breathing, the hum of the fluorescent lights, and nothing else. "This woman," Marcus continued, gesturing toward me, "is someone I know personally. 3 months ago, she found my elderly mother lost and confused on the street. She didn't know who my mother was, didn't know who I was, had no expectation of any reward or recognition. She simply saw someone who needed help, and she helped." I stared at him in shock. I remembered that day, finding an elderly woman crying on a bus bench, staying with her until her family came. I'd never thought about it again. It was just the right thing to do. "She spent over an hour making sure my mother was safe," Marcus went on. "She used her own phone, her own money, her own time. She was clearly on her way to work, probably at a job where being late means losing pay. But she stayed anyway. When I tried to thank her, to give her money for her kindness, she refused. She said anyone would have done the same thing." Marcus looked around the room, at all the people who had been so quick to judge me. "But here's the thing, not everyone would have done the same thing. Most people would have kept walking. Most people would have minded their own business. But not her." Mrs. Morrison's face was bright red now. Her son was staring at his shoes, and her husband looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "So when I walk into my hospital," Marcus continued, "and I see this same woman, this person who showed such compassion to my family, being treated like garbage because of how she's dressed or how much money she has in her bank account, it makes me wonder what kind of people we've become." He turned back to me, and his expression softened completely. "Sarah," he said, and I was amazed that he remembered my name. "Let's get Emma the help she needs." What happened next felt like a miracle. Marcus spoke quietly to the hospital administrator, and within minutes, Emma was being rushed to the pediatric ICU by the hospital's best emergency team. They had her on the right medications, the right oxygen levels, the right everything. For the first time in hours, I could see her breathing normally. But Marcus wasn't done. As Emma's condition stabilized, he sat with me in the family waiting area, and we talked, really talked. He told me about his mother, about how much my kindness had meant to his family. He told me that he'd actually looked for me after that day, wanting to properly thank me, but I'd disappeared like some kind of guardian angel. "I owe you a debt I can never repay," he said. "You gave me my mother back safely. Now let me help you." I tried to protest, to tell him that I didn't need charity, that I would figure out how to pay for Emma's treatment. But Marcus shook his head. "This isn't charity, Sarah. This is gratitude. And besides, I have a proposition for you." He explained that his company had been looking for someone to head up their new community outreach program, someone who understood what it meant to struggle, who had genuine compassion for people in difficult situations. "Someone exactly like me. The job comes with full health benefits," he said with a smile, "including the best pediatric care in the city for Emma." I started crying then, not from sadness or embarrassment this time, but from overwhelming relief and gratitude. Emma was going to be okay. We were going to be okay. As we talked, I noticed Mrs. Morrison and her family quietly leaving the hospital. They didn't make eye contact with anyone on their way out. Other patients, who had been whispering and pointing earlier, were now looking ashamed of themselves. A few even approached me to apologize. The teenager with the broken arm, who had been seen immediately despite arriving after Emma, came over with his parents. "I'm sorry," he said, and he actually seemed to mean it. "We were wrong to say those things." But the most incredible part of this whole story happened about a week later. Emma was fully recovered and back to her normal, energetic self. I had started my new job at Marcus's company and was learning more than I ever thought possible. We had moved into a better apartment. Emma was enrolled in a great school, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. That's when Marcus told me the rest of the story. "You want to know something interesting about karma?" he said during one of our weekly check-ins. "Mrs. Morrison, the woman from the hospital, she actually applied for a contract with our company about a month ago. Her husband's consulting firm wanted to bid on a major project." I felt my stomach tighten. "What happened?" Marcus smiled. "Well, we do background checks on all our potential partners, character assessments. We look at how they treat people, especially people they think can't help them. Let's just say that her behavior at the hospital was witnessed by several people, and word gets around in business circles." He didn't need to say more. I understood. The way Mrs. Morrison had treated me, a stranger in her most vulnerable moment, had revealed something about her character that no amount of expensive clothes or fake politeness could hide. "But here's the beautiful thing about this story," Marcus continued. "Your kindness to my mother didn't just save her that day, it saved you too. Because you chose compassion over indifference. Because you helped someone when no one was watching. You created a connection that would change your entire life." Looking back now, 6 months later, I can see the truth in what he said. Every single choice we make matters. Every moment of kindness, every act of compassion, every time we choose to help someone instead of walking away, these things ripple out into the universe in ways we can't imagine. Emma is thriving in her new school. She's joined the drama club and talks constantly about becoming an actress. Her asthma is well controlled now, with the best medical care available. Most importantly, she's learned something valuable from our experience: that people are more than their circumstances, and that kindness is the most important thing we can offer each other. As for me, I've found my calling in community outreach. Every day I get to help people who are going through what I went through. People who feel invisible, overlooked, judged by their circumstances. I get to remind them that they have value, that their struggles don't define them, and that tomorrow can be completely different from today. And Mrs. Morrison? I actually saw her a few months ago at a coffee shop. She recognized me and looked embarrassed, but I smiled and waved. I harbor no anger toward her. Everyone has bad days, everyone makes mistakes, and everyone deserves the chance to grow and do better. The truth is, that horrible day in the hospital taught me something profound. We never know who's watching, we never know whose life we might touch, and we never know when our smallest acts of kindness might come back to save us. If you're going through a difficult time right now, if people are judging you based on your circumstances, if you feel invisible or worthless, please remember this story. Remember that your value isn't determined by your bank account, your clothes, or your job title. Your value comes from your character, your compassion, and your willingness to help others, even when no one is watching. And if you're someone who has looked down on others, who has made assumptions based on appearances, who has forgotten that everyone has a story worth respecting, there's still time to change. There's still time to choose kindness over judgment, compassion over cruelty. This story proves that kindness always comes back to you, even when you least expect it. If Sarah's strength inspired you, smash that like button and share this with someone who needs to remember that good things happen to good people. Subscribe for more real stories that will restore your faith in humanity. And remember, treat everyone with kindness, because you never know who might be watching. Because in the end, we're all just people trying to make it through another day. And sometimes, the difference between despair and hope is simply knowing that someone sees your worth, even when you can't see it yourself.